Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on a Friday afternoon to go through this webinar about setting yourself up for success in Q4. At least it's not a sweltering Friday like it was last week, so hopefully you've got yourself comfortable and you're ready to learn about some of the things we've got to show you today. Before we begin, I just want to introduce myself and the guest speaker we have on today's webinar. So I'm Sophie, I'm the Head of Product and Marketing at Datametrics. And on the webinar with me today, I've got Peter. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Peter. I'm a Senior Insight Manager at Pi. I sit within the customer team and help customers get maximum value from their search data.
Great, thanks. So just to recap, I know you've all signed up for the webinar and you are aware of the content that we're going to cover today, but just to recap what we'll be going over. So what the recession might mean for marketers. We've seen a lot of publications and literature covering this topic recently, and we want to try and distill some of that down to some of the most important points for you guys to focus on and what you can kind of communicate back to the business to make it helpful insight for them. The performance landscape so far in 2022, rising consumer trends and how you can capitalize on these, commercial content opportunities, and proving the ROI of SEO. So before we get stuck into the content, I know we've got a lot of customers on the call today, but there are a lot of non-Pi customers as well. So I just wanted to do a quick introduction to the Pi Datametrics software. So Pi Datametrics combines industry-leading software, data, and people to help brands perform better online and increase organic performance and revenue. And most of the charts that you're going to see today have been taken directly from the Pi platform, so you can see the level of insight that we can give you and that we currently give our customers. So let's get stuck straight in. What the recession might mean for marketers. If you're anything like us, your inbox would have been absolutely flooded with articles along this line recently. How to communicate back to the business that what you're doing needs to continue. The predictions for ad revenue falling. And as I said, we want to take some of this insight, distill it down, and highlight some of the most important points. So we saw in the drum recently that the IPA predicted that ad growth forecast has gone down to 1.6 for 2023. It was previously 3.5. I know we work in organic, so for those of you who are unaware, the IPA is the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising. So obviously, they're predicting that ad budgets are going to be slashed, and this is going to be long-standing and long-term. However, when we looked more deeply into the article, we saw some really interesting analysis from Paul Bainsfair, who's the IPA Director General at the IPA. And basically, all of their analysis on who does best in a downturn showed that companies that recover fastest are the ones that either maintain or increase their marketing spend during difficult economic times. He added that equally cutting ad budgets relative to competitors' spend in a recession undermines companies' ability to grow future market share and profits. So this is obviously, across all advertising, not just search advertising and anything within the digital sector, but I think it can relate to what we're looking at today. When we look more specifically into the world of search, we found a really interesting article from Search Engine Watch. Their article stated that according to a literature review of existing research, 7 studies found that preserving campaign budgets could increase sales during and after economic downturn. Most notably, one study concluded that companies that refused to reduce ad spend increased sales by almost 340% 4 years on from the economic recovery. So there are a couple of reasons why they stated that you shouldn't be cutting your ad spend during recessions. The first one being you cannot seize the lion's share. So if your competitors have abandoned their marketing campaigns to garner short-term savings, now is your time to shine, which I think is even more crucial in organic search, but we'll go on to that in a second. So obviously you want to make the most of competitors taking away their ad presence and their share of voice from the market. You can really capitalize on that opportunity rather than falling in line with them. And the second reason was you want to be ready for recovery. So marketing teams that build resilience during recession are much better prepared for quick bounce back post-recession when competitors are still resurrecting their lack of performance from cutting those budgets during the recession. So, I mean, obviously, we work in the world of advertising and marketing. We will be kind of seeing people push this narrative. but there's more than enough evidence out there to suggest that you shouldn't be cutting either your ad spend or your efforts during a recession in any of your marketing channels. So now moving on specifically to organic search. So why organic activity in particular should be preserved. So we took this off LinkedIn from our friend Dan Foley, who obviously stated that recession presents a challenging time for all of us. We know that, but SEO in particular shouldn't be cut. We all know from working in the sector that it's one of the most efficient ways to get new revenue and customers to your website. It's also got long-standing benefits. Once you've built that equity up online, that's going to serve you for months and potentially years to come, not just in the moment as some pay-per-click models can do. So basically, whether your ad spends in your company are getting cut or not, it's more important than ever to be capitalizing on your organic opportunity, because if the ad spend is getting cut, there will be more opportunity and more responsibility on the organic teams to keep that share of voice for your business high. But if it doesn't get cut, you still want to be focusing all of your efforts and getting your content to the top of Google, because your competitors may well be pulling away from that kind of resource and effort to do that at the moment. So you may have a slightly less saturated market to get your content ranking really highly. So hopefully that gives everybody a good bit of context to what we're talking about today. So the performance landscape so far in 2022, we wanted to look at that because we wanted to see who's already doing really well and who's set up for success as it stands going forward for the rest of Q3 and Q4. So I'm going to ask Peter to take everybody through this share of voice chart for fashion retail so far. Peter, do you want to explain what we're seeing here?
Yeah, so this is obviously one of our share of voice charts. So we're looking at the retailers that own the high value terms within the fashion search landscape. So what we can see in this chart is it's been relatively static over the last 12 months, and there are two sort of clear market leaders in Next and ASOS, which means they have a really broad coverage of search terms, and they're normally for those search terms within the top 3 positions. So you can see, yeah, it's been relatively static, and over the period, ASOS has just overtaken Next towards the end of Q3.
Great, thanks. And so when we pulled our quarterly leaderboards at the end of Q2, things were slightly different, and Next was at the top of the leaderboard. As you mentioned, they've recently been overtaken by ASOS. But our leaderboard on Q2 was pretty static versus Q1. You noticed this as well, didn't you, Peter?
Yeah, it's fairly static, but I think towards the end of Q2 we saw a lot more changes within Google. Obviously there was an algorithm update towards the end of Q2, and then some product review updates as well more recently. So I expect going into Q3 we will see a bigger shift, but definitely in Q2 it was fairly static.
Yeah. And just to reiterate, we are looking at the fashion market here, but I know there's lots of people on the call who work outside of fashion. The theory and the process that we're going through today should be applicable to any sector or market you're looking in. And we're using fashion as an example, as most people recognize the brands and it's pretty relatable for people to get their heads around. So if the top 10 have been pretty static over Q2, do you think that means there isn't really much room or opportunity for other players to come in and take up this organic real estate?
I think there's loads of opportunity. I think there's always opportunity for disruptors in the market. I think the next slide goes into the land of opportunity. So what does this slide show? It shows the domains or retailers that are currently sitting on pages 2 and 3 of Google for fashion terms. And this is normally where we start our journey with customers. We look at what opportunity they have on pages 2 and 3 of Google, because it's a good indicator of Google saying your content's fairly good. We're going to put it on pages 2 and 3, and with some optimization, you might be able to push that onto page 1 and then start increasing that click-through rate from search results to your site. So obviously this is where we start the journey of sort of SEO with our customers, looking at that opportunity. And the revenue opportunities you can see here are based on moving from pages 2 and 3 onto page 1, and then industry standard click-through rates and conversion.
Yeah, this is really interesting because to get to this stage, you've obviously already created the content and got it ranked to a decent position, but there should just be some kind of hygiene work and, you know, theoretically quick wins to get yourself up onto page 1. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. And then from this point, we start the explorative stage of what are the page 1 sites doing? Is there anything we can learn from that? But then also really investigating the search landscape, which we'll go on to look at to understand what searchers want from the sites that are returning on page 1 and how you can get onto page 1 through those features and through understanding that search intent as well.
Amazing. So as you can see, there's plenty of opportunity out there for people to boost their organic revenue once they're focused on the opportunities that are going to deliver that for the business. So we've already looked at identifying your high opportunity positions and content that you can boost up onto page 1. We're now going to look at rising consumer trends and what we think we can predict and how we think we can help inform and shape content for the rest of the year. It's important to look at these trends. So here we have a search volume timeline from 2019 all the way up to July 2022. And this search volume timeline shows different categories within the fashion sector. So women's wear, menswear, non-gender specific accessories and kids wear. And looking at these historical timelines can really help inform your future strategy. So here you can see similar peaks happening every year. And you could make an intelligent guess that that will continue for the rest of 2022. However, we obviously have external factors coming in as well that might impact those search volumes and trends. So you have to consider both when planning your content strategy for the rest of the quarter. But for this chart in particular and this process we go through, we've drilled down into women's wear simply because it's the highest search volume line we have on this particular chart. So once we've identified an opportunity area in women's wear, Peter, what would be the process that you then go through with your customers and pie customers to help explore where precisely those opportunities are?
Yeah, I'm obsessed with search volume data. I think it really gives you obviously a strong indication of demand within a market, and it's been really interesting following the pandemic to see where search volume trends have gone. But from this point, obviously, women's wear is a really broad category. We'd want to understand what within women's wear is driving the growth or driving the peaks and troughs, and then target those at the right time. So yeah, so if I think the next slide goes into sections within women's wear. So
yeah, so here we've focused specifically on dresses.
Yeah, so dresses has been really interesting. Again, following the pandemic, obviously during the pandemic, everyone switched to loungewear, activewear, etc. We kind of had dresses, or the death of dresses, as you know, the most in-demand product within women's wear. But since restrictions have been lifted, we've really seen that increase. We saw a peak in November 2021. Which we thought may not be surpassed in terms of demand, but obviously going into 2022, it's been surpassed again. I think in May it was the largest search volume we'd seen for dresses, and that's been driven by 2022 being the year of the wedding. So I imagine that trend is going to extend into Q4. I think there's still a lot of people trying to, getting married following the restrictions. So I imagine dresses will be a trend that we continue to see.
Yeah, and what's interesting is we haven't yet seen any decline in search volume for these products based on the predicted recession. People are still searching for these even more so than last year. So this is an area that has not yet been impacted by cost of living crisis and other factors. Here's another line, so the second highest volume search category within women's wear, which is coats and jackets. This one I find particularly interesting because it's really seasonal, obviously. So you can see the peaks and troughs happening in the second half of the year. When Peter and I were discussing this earlier, we were both quite surprised at how early coats and jacket searches begin. Not necessarily to say people will start buying them, but when the research begins, it's as early as kind of June, July for searches to start again for the second half of the year for coats and jackets. Peter, what are your observations on this chart?
Yeah, I think if I had to predict when coats and jackets would peak without any search volume data, I would say the coldest months of the year, January and February. But obviously, most people have bought their coat and jacket by that point. So I think this is really important, obviously, when we're working with SEO teams, because they need to be well ahead of that search demand as well, or that peak. So they need to obviously have their content optimized, indexable, etc. Well before the peak happens, particularly as well with seasonal things. So obviously looking forward to Q4, we've got Christmas coming up. With all the customers that we work with that have like a high Christmas product range, we're looking at September as really getting those pages live and well ahead of the demand peak in November. So we saw last year that the best players within the market for Christmas products went in September, got those pages live. So yeah, really interesting.
I think we have seen teams use search data to influence their product teams' buying behavior as well. And when they're getting products live out in their shops or on their websites, some really good uses of search data we've seen is when people have overlaid search volume trends such as this with actually buying behaviors through their website. So obviously there's quite frequently a lag between when search volumes start kicking up and when people actually buy on their website or in their stores as well. And I think this kind of information is really important to give back to the retailers to say, even though people aren't necessarily buying this product yet, they're researching it. So it's a really key time to capture those customers and influence them, whilst potentially competition is still relatively low as well. I think, just to reiterate, again, we're using fashion as an example, but we're seeing this across many categories with our customers, and there's some really intelligent stuff going on with people from finance and travel, as well as fashion. Now, this chart I find super interesting. So we're not looking at fashion specific terms here, we're looking at multiple different categories, but Peter's done some amazing analysis on types of searches by prefixing best and cheap before all of the different types of search terms. So what does this tell us?
Yeah, so this is based on 250 of the most bought products and services within the UK. And yeah, whether searchers are looking for best or cheap versions of that product. So at the start of this chart, we can see that after the pandemic, or since the pandemic, we saw a shift of people looking towards best products. So that search volumes for best products was up about 50%, and people had really started to move away from searching for cheap products. You can see that was down 50%, but the real story is towards the end of the graph. So going into January, we start to see consumers really move back to cheap products or cheap products and services. And going into the last couple of months, search volume for cheap products has doubled compared to what it was last year. So whereas best is obviously flatlining or has decreased for the last 12 months as well. So I think that's really interesting, because I think cheap is kind of a proxy for affordable or good value. I don't think, obviously, normally consumers aren't looking for cheap products, they're looking for value within the market. So we've seen that shift happen since January and really start to kick in towards the last couple of months as well.
Yeah. And there might be quite interesting conversations going on internally, because obviously a lot of brands won't want to position their products as cheap. As you said, there could be connotations with that. It's more value or affordable, but it's thinking cleverly about how you can be optimized for some of those terms without necessarily impacting your branding or having to cut margins for products. So I think this is super interesting. When we were looking at it earlier, we were saying, oh, it's a bit disappointing that people maybe are looking for cheap things again, and maybe going back to a less sustainable view after we've seen a lot of sustainability searches increasing over the previous years. But the marketing team here at Pi found a really good article from Think with Google the other day about how cheap and value and affordable searches are on the rise in line with sustainability searches. So people are still being conscious consumers whilst being conscious about value as well. I think Holly from the marketing team is going to post that article in the chat box for the webinar, alongside the articles earlier from the Drum and from Search Engine Watch that we went through. So how do we find commercial content opportunities within our data? We've used another chart from Pi here. This is the organic revenue opportunity chart. So again, we're using fashion as an example and women's wear specifically, and we have all the different subcategories that we have within women's wear listed here. This chart shows a specific website, and it's anonymous here, but it's a top player within the fashion UK space. Their current organic revenue that they're gaining from these different categories, that's the dark blue. The benchmark, which is this yellow line here, so how are they in line with what we see from the rest of the sector? And then we have a target amount for them, as well as the total opportunity there is within that category. So this target amount is basically focused on the content that they have on pages 2 and 3 in Google. So as we said earlier, that low-hanging fruit, hopefully quick win opportunity that they could shift straight in, hopefully the organic revenue space. And it also shows how much more potential for growth there is within that category as well. So going through similar journeys that we did earlier, we focused on a specific subcategory here, coats and jackets. So from looking at that target opportunity space here, obviously the next question from our customers is what's in there? What are the search terms and content that are within that space? So you can see here the terms and content within that space. I'm using ASOS as an example here. We have the search terms on the left, and then we have the search volume following that. So you can see these are really high volume search terms, so a lot of commercial opportunity for them there. And then you can see their end URL and what position they're now in. So things, URLs on page 2 and 3 basically. You can see there's some movement here as well. So our advice to our customers is to find those really high value terms and pieces of content through looking at this, looking at high search volume, high organic value, pages 2 and 3, find that content and apply some techniques to boost that up to page 1 without having to redo a lot of your content and find new opportunities all the time. There's a lot of optimization work that can be done. So how do we do that? I hear you asking. So we've got a couple of tips. Obviously, there are multiple ways you can improve the optimization of your content. We've got some of our top tips that we're talking to our customers about now that we've seen have the biggest impact on performance. So onto our favorite topic as a company, cannibalization. So we talk about this again and again and again, but that's because it's still super interesting and we still see so many websites with cannibalization problems. John Earnshaw's done a study and the majority of people are actually competing with content on their own website rather than on their competitors' websites, which I find incredibly fascinating. Peter's going to talk through this specific example of how Zalando are performing for the coats example we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, so this is Zalando. They were second on the list of companies with the majority of content on page 2 and 3 of Google. And this is a huge high value term for them where they're currently in those positions. So this is women's winter coats. And you can see that they have 2 competing pages for this search term, and Google is flip-flopping between the 2. The A and B on this chart indicates that there was a change between the top performing piece of content. Yeah, so here there is an opportunity for the search expert to identify which of these pages should be ranking for that search term and then signal to Google which page it should be. So I'm not a search expert, I'm a data expert, but working with search experts, obviously you can pass authority to the correct page, titles and content obviously as well as huge help to indicate to Google which of these pages is the best match for the search intent around women's winter coats. And obviously based on those 2 URLs, you'd expect that to be URL B. Yeah.
And I think it's really important that people go through the process of finding the commercial opportunities before finding cannibalization. Because as we said, websites that have so much cannibalization going on, and you could go down the path of trying to fix all of those cannibalization issues, but some of them might not actually help boost your performance or your revenue in any meaningful way. So we'd always advise it's best to find those commercial opportunities first and then apply these tactics. So on from cannibalization, talk to us about page titles.
Yeah, so I've been really interested in page titles this year because there was conversation in January. Google confirmed that they were tweaking page titles to match search terms. So obviously that caused maybe some frustration within the SEO community. Obviously we're optimizing page titles to try and meet search intent, but Google is changing those anyway. But what I wanted to use it here for is to understand for Zalando, for this search term, what titles are returning on page 1 and how does that differ from the title that we're using. So obviously this is really sort of basic, it's really easy thing to do, but you can see that everything on page 1 included the term coats and jackets, and the top link here was Zalando's returning classic link, so they didn't have coats and jackets within the title. So within the second one, I've amended their title to women's coats and jackets, highlighted winter coats as the opportunity because winter coats is the search term, not winter jackets. And then also something else I've noticed within Google changing titles is within the country you're searching from, it will drop UK or GB if you're already based there. So obviously Zalando UK, the searcher knows that they're in the UK, they don't need that information. So I've seen Google dropping UK and GB from title, so I've just dropped that from the title there. But yeah, interesting to see what people on page 1 are doing and how you can apply that to your site.
Yeah, definitely. And moving away from classic links, because we know we're seeing more and more feature-rich environments within the SERPs, we also see a huge opportunity from People Also Ask. So we do have a lovely new People Also Ask tool within Pi. We find that a lot of the terms, especially the high volume, high value terms, are obviously incredibly competitive, and lots of people are going after them and may already be very well embedded within the Google SERP with their classic links. So we find that harvesting People Also Ask questions that are related to those product types is a really useful way of an alternative of getting in front of your customers. Some might argue it's even a better way because you're helping to inform your customers and give them answers to the information they're looking for, rather than just putting a product directly in front of them. Having worked with an e-commerce company before, we did a study that if people viewed a content informational page before they viewed a product page, they were more likely to be a return customer, to have higher average order value, and to have a higher conversion rate. So even though you might have to wait slightly longer for that product purchase to come through, in the end it could end up being a more high value activity, potentially particularly in those times where research is high but people aren't yet committing to buying a product. I know Peter has some really interesting thoughts on People Also Ask as well, and how it relates to conversion rate optimization.
Yeah, within my previous life, I worked with SEOs and CROs. So I think there's a huge opportunity within the People Also Ask question for conversion rate optimization on your website as well. So these questions are obviously what searchers are thinking when they're looking for winter coats. And they're likely to still be thinking that question when they're on your winter coats page. So having content that answers these top questions will help reduce the risk of them leaving your site and trying to find the answer to those questions. And obviously, if they leave your site, they may end up on a competitor site or an affiliate model piece of content that obviously loses you the conversion in the long run. We worked with a company that sold suitcases, and obviously the top People Also Ask questions around suitcases were the type of suitcases that were allowed with different airlines. So for example, EasyJet, what size of suitcase you allowed on EasyJet, and they noticed they were losing a lot of people when looking at suitcases. And if you googled that, the top performing piece of content other than EasyJet themselves was Argos. So if they're not landing on EasyJet, they're landing on Argos, where there is that answer to the question, and obviously then you might be losing that sale to your competitor. So yeah, I think there's a real conversion rate optimization opportunity here as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I feel like Argos get it right so frequently with their content pages. Moving swiftly on, because I know we're getting close to our time, but proving the ROI of SEO. So obviously when we're going into this economic recession, a lot of people are going to be wanting to prove and showcase the value of their work. And I think this is more important than ever to ensure that those budgets aren't getting cut and the resource isn't getting cut. So we have ways that we do this with our customers. We'll show first just something from the Pi platform. So do you want to talk us through this, Peter?
Yeah, so this is estimated traffic from organic positions. So again, it's an example of Debenhams for fashion, a click-through rate that we'd expect across all the search terms that they're tracking, and then you can prove from that the growth in estimated traffic based on your organic performance.
Great, thanks. And what we find sometimes opens the eyes of line managers and senior people in businesses isn't always around traffic and positions. It's obviously about revenue. So linking in this Pi data to your analytics. Most of our customers are using Google Analytics, and reporting on that can be a really good way of showcasing the increases that organic search is driving for your business. I think we've pulled a lot of headlines recently. Well, actually looking back, these are 2021, but we have more recent examples as well of people that are topping those organic leaderboards are doing really well as businesses. So this could be causation or correlation. That business could be particularly good at looking at data to inform decisions and have really forward-thinking processes. But people who are doing well organically are doing well business-wide. So this is a link to make when talking to stakeholders in your business as well. And so that's pretty much all of the content we have for today. All of this is going to be written up in a blog post as well, so you can reference some of those stats if you need to and revisit some of the takeaways. But just to cover off quickly a lot of the points we've gone through today. So some of the key takeaways. We believe there will remain a strong and probably growing opportunity for organic marketers over Q4 with either the reduction or the maintenance of ad spend. There's still going to be so much opportunity for organic marketers. But the key will be to stay close to your customers by keeping an eye on the organic landscape, the performance, and also the trends and the terms that are going to be helping deliver higher ROI from you, because this may be different over this year than it has been previous years. So it's really important to keep an eye on those changing data points. Sometimes Google Trends can be lagging, but this is a really good opportunity to collaborate with maybe your paid search team who might have more instant access to trend and volume data than you do. And like I said, as well as that trend data, it's important to look at the external information to help inform decisions. So what's going on in the economy and more macroeconomic factors. So I think that's it for today. Peter, do you have anything else to add apart from shout about your success, one of my favorite topics? So make sure if you are doing things well, tell the business about it and show them why that's happening. But yeah, Peter, anything to add?
No, I think we've covered it all.
Perfect. Great. So for those of you who aren't Pi customers on this call, thanks for watching. And you can always sign up for a demo of the product. I think there's a link to a demo sign up now in the chat box, or just reach out to either Peter or I on LinkedIn. We're always up for answering questions around these topics because we're nerdly passionate about them. Or just get in touch with anyone from Pi that you see talking on LinkedIn. We're more than happy to help show you how the platform and the insights can help improve your performance. And that's it. Thanks very much for joining us.